Let's get this started. Hi everyone, I'm Philipp. Hello, hi. Lunch was good? Or lunch is still good? Okay, so let's see how I can entertain you with some YAML. Who likes YAML? That's the Stockholm Syndrome, right? You get so used to doing something that at some point you kind of like it and accept it. Yeah. Who is, by the way, a YAML engineer? Who is writing more YAML than other code by now? Anybody? No? Okay. Because sometimes I have people who write more YAML than any other code by now, which is an interesting development. So let's see how we got here, or where did I even get the title from? Many of you probably know the original paper, "Go-to statements considered harmful." This is why go-to is not a thing anymore, and we all hate on go-to. And I'm just putting in YAML into this one to say, like, maybe we should think about that YAML might also be kind of harmful. Though I've also heard that if you call something blah, blah, blah is considered harmful, this is an anti-pattern in itself. So let's see how we can agree on the YAML part here. So why did we even get YAML? So first off, what we normally want is we want to have a human readable format. And for most of us, that excludes XML. Or at least for me it does. Like, XML is not the best format for humans. And then the other thing that you'd normally want to have are comments. And that generally excludes JSON, because in JSON you don't really have comments. So the combination of we want to have something that humans can read and we want to have comments, that is kind of the reason why we got to YAML in the first place. Whitespace sensitivity is something important in YAML. Who thinks this is a good idea, that white spaces make a difference? Nobody. Okay, this is interesting because you can see this is a Java conference, and for Java developers or C++ developers or anybody used to curly braces, whitespace sensitivity is unnatural and a bad thing, and nobody should have that. Whereas if I ask the same question at the Python or Ruby conference, everybody would say that this is the only right way to do stuff. Like, we hate curly braces. And white spaces are the only thing to do. So that's why I would say this one depends. Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? YAML is just the way it is. White spaces are important. This is something where you, for example, we have ports, we have a Docker container, and we want to map some ports. And we want to map port 80 in the container to the outside world on port 80 and port 20 as well. Does anybody know why this will not work or how this will break? And this is one of the fun ways of YAML doing stuff. So if you run this tiny snippet here through a YAML linter, what you will get is this. Sorry. I didn't touch anything. Okay. Let's stick with this one. So why did I get this number here? Why did my 20:20 end up as this big number? Because YAML considers anything below 60, so :60, anything lower than that, to be the base. And you're basically doing a base 60 here rather than a base 10. And that number here is, or that port mapping, this one here is a port that's properly quoted if you lint it, but this one is just interpreted as a number, because it's assumed it's a base 60. And this is what YAML does. By the way, the Docker docs explicitly pointed out that you shouldn't do that. If you have any port mappings, always quote them to avoid that problem. Otherwise, you might have a fun time. This one here is pretty obvious. Like here, the syntax highlighting already saves us, because this is, I think, YAML has 13 different ways to have truthy or falsy values. So it's yes, no, true, false, and various other things, how you can represent a Boolean value. And this one, you think it's a simple list of countries. Here you suddenly have a Boolean value in there. So don't do that. What is the workaround to fix that? You have to quote, yes. In YAML, always more quotes. Like everything quoted and values, and you're normally good. These are some other examples of stuff that can go wrong weirdly. Like this will either be interpreted as empty, like the tilde, or as actually the empty value. Here, a colon in a value is not allowed. Again, you would need to quote this. This one here looks correct, but you probably didn't mean to have a floating value for the version number. So it looks good, but it's not really what you intended probably. But YAML does have no idea what you really mean, so this is what you would get out of that. So what I think is okay to have data in YAML. What you shouldn't do is to have behavior or programming in YAML, because it's really not made for that. And their stuff will break. So, for example, GitLab, I don't want to bash on GitLab too much, but for example, GitLab has, for its own CI server, they have some setup where now it's broken up into multiple files, but if you go here, it will link out to 5 or more other files, and in total, it's more than 1,000 lines of YAML to actually bootstrap itself. But this is kind of a lie, because when you actually look at it, you see you have all the YAML, but then you still call a shell script, because YAML doesn't have everything you need. And then you have the best of all the worlds. Then you have YAML and shell scripts combined. And that's what you really don't want to have normally, that you get the worst of all parts. Because then you can look at that, and then you will have all the joys of what shell scripts do and whatever is happening here. Nobody can read that anymore. So the other thing that you might encounter sooner or later is Helm templates. And something that is really weird here, or I think is kind of an indicator that you're doing something weird, is that you have this indent for, that you actually need to tell it, okay, include this other thing here and indent it correctly. Here you can just say, like, this is not a proper templating language. Because of the whitespace sensitivity, it's just not going to work out very well. And you can try to work around everything, like you say, okay, you have a value here, and please quote the value for me, and this one here should be indented as well. But this is just a pain. Nobody really wants to write stuff like that and then forget, here this should be quoted, or here this should be indented by that many spaces. This is just not how templating should work. Like, I don't want to bash too much on PHP, but even PHP does that better for templating. So I would generally say, if you want to use a domain-specific language, use a DSL, because programming languages are generally pretty good with those by now. So it's much easier to have that. And the other problem is, you might have some YAML template that can do a lot of stuff, but every now and then you need something else. And once you're stuck at that, you go back to the GitLab example where, okay, we needed to express something else, and now we're falling back to a shell script. So your YAML is all nice until you hit some barrier that you cannot pass, and then you need to fall back on something else again. So use a domain-specific language if you want to do that, and not a templating engine, because it's just not going to work out well. Maybe you've seen JSONnet, which is owned by Google, but not an official Google product or anything. They basically try to take JSON and then add some more stuff around it to make it more usable. If that is really the way forward, I'm still not sure, but it's one thing that is kind of being promoted a bit. Other alternatives, what could you do instead of YAML? So you could go back to good old XML, and this is probably pretty small to read, but you can see, okay, we have a comment here, and then we have, well, lots of angular brackets and lots of nesting, and probably nobody wants to read that. What you could do instead is you could do JSON, but then for JSON you can maybe see that here I have an underscore comment, and in this one I basically try to simulate a comment because it doesn't have proper comments. And also you have all the white space noise, like you have curly brace here and comma, and maybe you don't want to have that in a configuration language. Another format is ini. Is anybody old enough to remember ini? Okay, you're an old crowd. Ini is interesting. One of the things, or one of the main pain points in ini is that it doesn't have nesting. So for example, here I have a list of servers, and I have a server alpha and a server beta. But since there is no nesting, I basically have to simulate that kind of nesting where I just have a longer name, where I have servers and then server alpha IP, because there is no nesting structure. Also, because the interpreters are pretty old, some of them had weird bugs. For example, I think on Windows, it's not case sensitive. So case sensitivity doesn't make any difference on Windows in ini. So you might not want to do that. You could use Toml, which is trying to take the good parts of ini and combine them with the rest of the other good parts. So here you have nesting, so here you have servers, and then you can put servers alpha into that. What is totally optional here, for example, is the space or the indentation. So you don't need to have that, but for better readability, it's pretty common to actually indent that a bit. It's not super widespread. Some systems have that, but I don't think it's really the winning choice either. So we're probably stuck with YAML in the end still. So how can we write better YAML? Or yeah, by the way, this one here is the best one. This is an IBM standard. This is taking the worst parts of JSON and YAML, and then combines them together, and then you have JSON-X. So don't do that. This is going to end horribly. So what you want to do is you want to write better YAML. So you doing better YAML, something you can do, and this might be hard to see, but this is the indent rainbow. And you can see here, this has a different color than this indentation. So based on the indentation, you can see how much indentation you have, and it's much easier to see, so your editors can often help you. Sometimes linters can help you as well. So for example, let's take a very simple example. So I have my bad YAML here. So you can see here we have the port mapping problem. Here we have Norway. We have the null, the C drive, and the floating value. We have all of those here. If I run that through a YAML linter, how many of these do you think will be detected? Or what will be detected? Only 1? 0? Nah, actually it's some stuff that might be interesting. So the first thing is, in line 12, it tells us, well, truthy or falsy should only be represented by true and false, which is probably sane. So this one here, it tells us, it's not an error, but it's a warning that this sounds weird. The other thing is, you don't have a new line character at the end. Okay, that's more stylistic, I would say. That's not really breaking anything here. And mapping values are not allowed here. So this one in line 17, that is also detected. This one here is a floating value. This is totally correct, so it doesn't detect that. Null could be the empty value that you want here. And this one, unfortunately, is not detected. I mean, even my cat alternative here shows that this is handled differently than this here. But the linter doesn't know it. So linters will only give you some hints of what you can do and not go all the way, unfortunately. Some people have tried to write stuff in JSON and then convert it to YAML to avoid all the bad parts of YAML. But maybe you don't want to do that either, because then you have the dummy elements and you have all the curly braces and everything again. The one thing that you probably want is, so this part is supposed to do the same thing as this one here. First off, here we just start quoting more stuff and we indent more. So here, just to be sure, I had more indentation, so it's better readable. So generally, whenever you write YAML, be generous with quotes because they help you, and also be generous with indentation, so it's easier to read stuff. It's not a fix for anything, it's just a helper to make your life a bit easier. So, with this, we lost the screen, but this was it anyway. So, before we go to the questions, if you have any questions, I normally try to take a picture with you so I can prove to my colleagues that I've been working today. Because nobody knows where I am today. Like, we're a distributed company and I could be anywhere. Can you wave? Wave, wave, wave. Thank you. Are there any questions? Or let's start with a different question. Who wants to write more YAML? Okay, the Stockholm Syndrome is still in effect. Are there any questions? I think we have 1 minute left for questions, if there are any. If not, you get back 1 minute. If you want to have stickers, there are a couple of stickers here. Take whatever you want. Then we're done with stickers. Thanks a lot.
Oh, come on. Philip, I have a question.
Yes,
I'm here.
Where are you? There.
My question is, how I should debug my YAML?
How should you debug your YAML?
Yeah.
So hopefully you don't have behavior, so you don't need that much debugging. So I would always assume debugging is mostly used for program flow, basically. So don't do that in YAML. Data is fine, program flow not.
Okay, so YAML only for, if I have description in YAML, for example, Circle CI, it's described flows in YAML.
Yeah, that's already, I already find that kind of a weird pattern, and I don't think that YAML is really the right tool for that. I know it's very widely used. But yeah, debugging is definitely another problem that you have. You cannot just step through it with a debugger or anything.